All right, so this training is going to break down the butt wink and an algorithm, which we're giving you in a download, right? It's a small section of one of the algorithms from our 12-week certification course. The squat checklist, right, to figure out butt wink, easiest testing, most common to least common things here, right? So if somebody is missing range of motion, that's going to be the biggest, most common reason. If somebody can't let their knees go forward because they run out of ankle mobility, they're going to shift posteriorly and potentially have a butt wink. If somebody's running out of hip room because their hip can't passively go past a certain degree, it's going to round out and cause a butt wink. So if we look at Caitlin can demo what a butt wink is for us. If you don't know, it's when you squat down and you get the loss of the lumbar curve there, typically towards the bottom. Go ahead and come back up. And Caitlin doesn't have one. Go ahead and show us what a normal squat looks like. All right, so she's got a pretty good squat. Now in this position, can you let your butt wink under, right? And then bring your heels or your butt all the way down to your heels, like shoo, right? And then come back up and fix it, right? And then back down. That's what it would typically look like, something like that. Go ahead and come back up. So we get this flexion extension at the bottom of the squat or anywhere in the range of motion. So easiest thing to do is to elevate the heels and see if that fixes it. So you can use a slant board, you can use some 25-pound bumper plates. It doesn't really matter. Go ahead and stand on a slant board and just squat down. All right? Quick screening test. If that fixes it, that looks great. Then that tells us the problem is in the ankle, because the only thing that does is it changes how much dorsiflexion is needed. So if that is positive, if that makes a positive change, then we're going to go to the 5-inch needle wall test, which you could bust out a tape measure or you could just use your hand. So you're going to need your patient in a half kneeling position here, where we're going to get one hand width or about 5 inches away from the wall. So go ahead and bring your toe to touch my thumb there. And what we want to make sure of is that her back hip isn't an extension. So if anything, maybe sneak your knee a little bit closer to the wall, because we don't want her to get a false test by running out of hip room on this side. So Caitlin, what you're going to do is you're going to bring your knee over your second toe here, right? Over the second and third toe, center of the knee. Try to touch it to the wall without letting your knee come up. So Caitlin passes this, but what would happen is somebody would stick it here, because Caitlin doesn't have an actual restriction. But if we come in here, we're like, oh, you're missing mobility there. So then what we want to see is, Caitlin, do you have a pinching or a stopping sensation in the front or the outside part of the ankle, or do you get a stretch back here? Which one?
Pinch.
Pinch. She doesn't have it. But if she were to get a pinch or a stopping sensation, that would indicate that it is the talocrural joint that's restricting. If she gets here and she's like, oh no, I don't feel anything in the front, but I get a big stretch back here, that indicates it's the soleus muscle that is restricting. But as you can see, she doesn't have any restrictions, and that is what we would want to see for somebody to be able to have a nice upright squat with no compensations coming from the ankle. So what a negative test might look like, or a positive test might look like, where somebody still touches, is they get pretty close and then watch the heel come up a little bit, fails, right? This has to stay down. Or they're struggling, they're like, I'm right here, and they're really trying to get it, and got it, they got a huge stretch, like, okay, cool, like, good job, you still fail. Or they'll come in, and what will happen is they'll run out of room there, and they compensate through the subtalar joint by letting the knee valgus, and then they get more range, because it does offload the Achilles a little bit at a different angle, and it offloads the talocrural joint and allows the subtalar joint to do most of the motion there. So those are the things that you want to be aware of, and you want to compare both sides, right? Not just one side, look at them both. So if you did the heels elevated squat test and it was no better, then you do not go to the wall. It is not the ankle. That's not the problem, right? Because if it was, it would make a difference. So then we're going to take a look at the posterior capsule of the hip, or just the hip mobility, specifically into flexion and internal rotation. You stand and you test on the side that you're on, right? So what we're going to do is flex her hip, keeping the knee bent for a little lever arm here, so we can control the leg a lot easier. We take the hamstring out of it and everything, and we just want to see how much can she bring her knee to her chest before her butt starts to round and she feels pressure of her back in the table. Now what we want to make sure that we're paying attention to is keeping a neutral rotation of the hip. When we come up, people will start to externally rotate and abduct a little bit, and that will give you more range if they're restricted because it's changing what's going on inside of the joint. So here, if we just come up and I'll just feel it and I'll get an idea of like where it runs out of room. So for Caitlin, it's right there, but that's a full deep squat. That's full hip flexion. For a lot of people, it ends right about where they sit, right here. So I'll say, hey, all right, so if I move this and I'll kind of go back and forth, you feel how that's just all leg, right? All leg. Let me know if you feel your back start to press into the table. Right, if right there you feel a little bit of movement, yeah, and I feel a little bit there too, right? And then I would compare to the other side. I would see, all right, cool, where is that? And if it's only at 90 degrees, I'm going to say, all right, well, you feel it at 90 degrees, but where do you squat to? You squat here, right? And what will happen is their butt's going to round. They're like, oh, yeah, I feel my butt rounding. And that makes sense. So how do we know it's the hip capsule? Well, we're also going to look at the internal rotation, right? So even though the foot's coming out, the femur is rolling in, and that is creating internal rotation of the hip. So we want to see, right, pretty similar motion typically, external rotation and internal rotation. You want to be looking at a bare bones minimum of 30 degrees of internal rotation. So when I do this to Caitlin, I feel a little resistance, but it kind of slowly builds up, and it's a little elastic feeling. It's bouncy, right? It's not super uncomfortable. It doesn't all of a sudden pinch or come to a hard stop. When I go into external rotation, it's bouncy there. That bounciness is a muscular end feel. When you look at somebody that has restricted internal rotation, it's like hitting a wall and it just stops very suddenly, and that's more of a firm end feel. So if you have restricted flexion and restricted internal rotation with a firm end feel, you can confidently say you need some hip joint mobility, some posterior mobility. Why? Because when you flex the hip, rolls forward, glides backwards in the joint. When you internally rotate the hip, it rolls forward, glides backwards in the joint. If it doesn't glide backwards, then that roll ends up with the femur hitting the acetabulum, creating a pinch, which pinches what? The labrum. And people are like, they'll tell you, I get a hip pinch. When I'm here, it pinches. And I can create that position with Caitlin here, where it maybe gets a little bit uncomfortable if I add some compression especially, right? So you can make it happen, but we want to see that we have normal cardinal range of motion without that happening. We don't want somebody squatting where you've got a soft tissue getting pinched between two hard tissues, i.e. their hip labrum getting pinched between the pelvis and the femur bones. So let's check this side here just to see. So if we come over here and we look at this, I'm going to feel your back starting to press into the table. Yes, a little bit more restricted than the other side, right? Now, she's just past 90, and if we look at her internal rotation, yeah, that's a firmer stop there, right? So we've got this much external, we've got this much internal, where now it's not bouncy. So she's got a little bit of hip internal rotation, flexion restrictions with a firm end feel. She's got a little bit of posterior capsule mobility. Do me a favor, flip around so I can stand on that side. Now, some of you guys might be saying, oh, well, it's the shape of her hip, and that's why, and she needs a different squat stance. And I'm going to challenge you on that, because I'm going to mobilize the posterior capsule of her hip. Her flexion is going to get better, her internal rotation is going to get better, and if it's the shape of her hip that causes that restriction, I'm not changing the shape of her hip. If that's truly the mapping of her acetabulum and the shape of her femur, nothing will ever change. But if I can just lean on it and push it posteriorly a little bit, and then we get a different result, 100% cannot be the shape of her hip, right? It's an easy out for people to be like, oh, well, it's just the way you're put together. No, solve the problem. Because I guarantee you, if you look at a picture of anybody when they're a child squatting, they're able to squat with their feet together, knees completely forward, they have full range of motion, and their hip was shaped the same way at that point. Before I mobilize, we'll look at the range of motion from this side too, so you guys have the same viewpoint, right? So if we're here, let me know again when you feel your back start to push into the table here. Right about there? Okay. And the internal rotation ends there very suddenly compared to the other side, right? So here to here, and we get about there. So you feel your back start to press in right about there, correct? All right. So I'm just going to bring this table down, And then if I just lean here in this position, no pinching or anything, right?
No, it's just, yeah.
What do you feel? Some pressure in the glute?
Yeah.
It's not like a big pigeon pose glute stretch, right? It's just pressure in the back of the glute. Good. So if I push there, you get a good amount of pressure there. And if we rotate this way a little bit, you okay with that? Good. Still no pinching, right? Perfect. Do me a favor, take a big breath in, squeeze your glutes, hold your breath for a second, and then breathe out and relax your glutes slowly. Good. A little bit more pressure. One more time, big breath in, squeeze your glutes, exhale, relax. Good. Feel okay there still? Just a little pressure? Cool. So I don't know how long that was, but very short amount of stretching there. And then here, let me know when you feel your back pressing into the table again. There, okay. And then let's look at where her internal rotation stops. And it's not all of a sudden running into a wall. It's slowly increasing, and now it's a little bit bouncier. Still stiff on the other side, but a little bit more giving there. Still not as bouncy as this, or nearly as much range, right? But she's not going to have, with how much external rotation she has, she's not going to get exactly that same amount of range. But we still, again, want at least 30 degrees there. You can see the difference. Let me know when. There, right? Versus where she was before. So if that was the shape of her hip, nothing would change. But then you know that she has to do some posterior capsule stretching, right? And then you can follow that up with some motor control and stability, where we've created the mobility, and now we have to add the stability in those ranges, right? Where that might look like an assisted hip airplane to use that full range, add a little bit of stretch in that internal rotation, and use the control on the way out, and then a 10-second squat on the way down to then functionally hammer it home in the way that's important to her, right? So she can start using the new hip mobility that she has, which will be temporary, which is why we have to build the strength in it and neurologically start to recognize it by using it in the squat patterns, right? But doing it very slowly so she can feel if she starts to get butt wink, and we can build the strength, stability, and change the motor patterning there. Now, if I did that test and it was completely negative on both sides, then we don't have a mobility issue at all. We have a stability, a motor control issue, in which case we're going to just hammer down on slow positional drills, such as using a box for a target, using an anterior weight like a goblet squat to create more awareness of the lumbar spine erectors, right? And holding that position so we can get them going with a tempo. We can give them an anterior weight that's going to pull them forward, right? Try to round their back so they can have this reactive neuromuscular training to then brace into that position. We can go through the bracing sequence with them and teach them how to do that, and then slow, controlled tempo reps and a controlled range of motion where we can slowly increase the range of motion, slowly increase the speed until they're squatting without thinking about it. And look, this is one small section of an algorithm for one small problem in one movement pattern. The squat is going to have way more faults that can happen than just a butt wink, right? They can have way more painful compensations and faults that happen than just a butt wink. And each compensation can have multiple reasons why it's happening. And this is why it's so important to have a systematized, algorithmic approach to being able to organize your evaluation and laser in on exactly what's going on and know for certain that you're treating the right thing. It's not just the squat. You've got the deadlift, you've got the lunge, you've got running, you've got Olympic weightlifting, you've got horizontal pushing, horizontal pulling, vertical pushing, vertical pulling. You've got all types of different movement patterns that you need to be able to break this down for fast and efficiently. So if you've got a patient with a butt wink or you have a butt wink, give this a try, run through it, get the reps in.